Kayleen. Welcome to my channel. I'm so glad you clicked on my thumbnail sketch. I have been trying to promote my book. I'm almost finished with my book entitled Mom Remembers Me. How I'm using my health and fitness knowledge, how I did use my health and fitness knowledge to stop my mother with mild dementia from forgetting me. And I started this YouTube channel to promote my book. And while I was taking care of my mother, I got into bullet journaling. And I also really got back into art taking care of my mother. So I know it sounds really corny, but I did come full circle taking care of my mother. I started doing art again. I did it growing up, and that was one of my mother was never really good at complimenting, but one of the very few compliments she did to me growing up was that my art was good. But as usual, artists, we don't think we're good enough. And I remember growing up thinking that if I wasn't good enough to draw it out of my head, it wasn't a good artist. And now that I've gotten back into it, I realize all artists, and even when I've watched a lot of Da Vinci documentaries, he didn't do anything out of his head. He copied, and he also made as many mistakes as he did successes. So, like I said, it's a corny thing, but I kind of came full circle taking care of my mother, got back into art. So, but I also got into bullet journaling, which kind of fits in with art and everything. There's a writer, Caro. I don't think I would guess, he did not have all the ideas of art that is kind of spewed out from what he did. And I listened to his book, and his book came out in 2015. I listened to his audiobook from the library in probably 2016. I started taking care of my mother in 2015, the end of 2015. I had a lot of crazy stuff happen taking care of my mother. You would not believe what happened. And it's all detailed in my book, Mom Remembers Me. But back to the at hand. I decided to use How the Grinch Stole Christmas as my December theme. Although I have been doing cartoon themes the past year, but I haven't done all the work with recording myself drawing it in my book, in my journal, my bullet journal. So I decided to do it this month. This is my birthday month. So I borrowed this book from the library. We all know how good the library is. And what's kind of ironic is my mother did kind of point out and remind me about the library probably 10 years ago. I wasn't going to the library. I think, we forget about the library. The library has everything. And you don't have to deal with commercials. I have not had cable for 20 years. I borrow all the DVDs from the library. I just borrowed the Top Gun a DVD from the library, no commercials and all that thing. I love movies, but the idea of sitting in a movie theater for 2 hours and not being able to move just really bothered me, so I didn't really didn't want to go to the movie theater for that, even though we know all the hype. So anyways, while you guys are watching me drawing, I thought I would teach you a little bit about Dr. Grinch, which is really Ted Geisel. So while you're watching me draw, I'm going to be teaching you a little about Ted Geisel. So thanks a lot for coming. I know this is a very long video. I try to shorten it up, and I'm using all Photoshop because I've used Photoshop for my graphic memoir, Mom Remembers Me. So I use InDesign to put it all together, Photoshop for the background pictures of my mother and myself, and then I used Adobe Fresco and Illustrator for everything else. So it's a different graphic memoir. You probably have never seen it. So I hope that you listen. If you don't, and I don't even know, I would really love for you to comment on what you do when you watch these videos. I have a tendency of watching, kind of having a lot of art videos in the background while I'm doing my own videos, while I'm doing my own drawing and stuff. I learned to love Torrin Marie in Australia. I like the Plant-Based Bride, Journal Away, Julianne Doodles. They're all really good. I really like all of those videos and all those YouTubers. So thanks for listening. I hope you listen to the end, but you could do what I do. Sometimes I do speed across and just look for the final flip through. I have a final flip through. And I have been teaching health and fitness for 35 years. So you've got some also other stuff in my bullet journal, monthly spreads to teach you what I do. So I wanted to explain first thing, I switched to, this is the very first journal that I went to just for all blank pages. I kind of got tired of the bullets. We spend so much time on the art. And the Dingbats notebook, I actually use that for my regular, I have 2 journals. I try to stick to only 2 journals. Sometimes we try to do a whole bunch, and then I kept thinking to myself, in the future I really want to read all of my journals for my memory, because I want to make sure I keep up with my memory. But if you separate all of your stuff into so many different journals, if you have a book journal and a sketchbook, I just feel like I won't read it. So now I only keep 2 journals. I keep the bullet journal, which is mostly for calendar stuff, and this, and I have another journal which I use the Dingbats, because they're the only one that's all blank. Because I really got tired of the dots. You spend so much time on beautiful artwork that I don't really like the dots. So this is just a canvas book. It was at Michael's. Michael's has so many of these sales, which really makes you wonder. It seems like 95% of the time I go into a Michael's, and I do go in there pretty often, at least maybe 2 or 3 times a month, and they always have these canvas books on sale. Buy one, get the second one half off. So this is just a canvas. And I was also trying to figure out whether I like the spiral. So far, I started this in November. I'm not really doing 1 book per year or two books per year. That's not how we live our life. I thought I'm not going to stress myself out trying to figure out how to get it all into. So I start a new book January 1st. So this is going to be my January 1st book. So this has been working out pretty good. The spirals don't really bother me. I thought it would. It bothers me when you get on this left side page, when you get close to the right there, but that's easily fixable. So that was one thing I wanted to go over. The bottom part of this page, I just copied some stuff off the internet and created them. They're just like little who's. I printed it up and put it as a bottom border. I actually kind of wish I hadn't done it, but I already glued them on there, so I left it there. So this is just me. The actual book I showed you early in the beginning, the intro. This is just the original, How the Grinch Stole Christmas. So I just copied all of it. That's all to the left there. So I was trying to save more space. And I was also trying to speed it up using Photoshop, which I'm not quite sure whether Photoshop is the best one, but I'm going to stick with Photoshop. And Photoshop and Adobe is always improving everything. Because I really am comfortable with Photoshop because I've been using it for my book. So let's go over a little bit of history. So I realized reading this book that I showed you in the beginning, which is actually written by, this is a whole book by a commentary by Charles D. Cohen. So Charles D. Cohen actually is a dentist, but growing up he loved Ted Geisel. So Dr. Seuss is really Ted Geisel, and they never really said in this book why he chose Dr. Seuss as a name. That's a really good question. They never mentioned this in this book. This is a really good book. I would highly recommend it. I showed you in the very beginning. And so, a little bit of facts about Dr. Seuss and Ted Geisel. He was 53 when he wrote this book, Dr. the Grinch. And he actually felt like the Grinch in the beginning, and that's why he decided to write Dr. Seuss, The Grinch Stole Christmas. And I sometimes feel like that way too. I was really surprised. I am from Western Massachusetts, and I went to Springfield College in Springfield, Massachusetts for my master's in health and fitness. It was actually called Health Promotion and wellness management, and Ted Geisel is actually from Springfield, Massachusetts. I'm like, lo and behold, what do you know? And I was another couple of facts. Horton Hears a Who is what Ted Geisel, Dr. Seuss, wrote to get different groups to live in harmony. At one point, there was a Life article suggested that Dr. Seuss write to teach kids how to read. And then I'm going to put a little picture here, see it right here, of how Dr. Seuss or Ted Geisel felt like he was the Grinch. And a couple other facts about the Grinch. He wanted to teach children if they look different and come from different places, they can still be friends. There was no mention of any religion in any of Ted Geisel or Dr. Seuss's work. He wanted to always try to find and encourage people to find the true spirit of friendship and community. And though it wasn't any color until 1966. In 1966 is when Chuck Jones decided to make the Grinch green. It was always black and white before that, with the pink eyes. In 1982, Ted Geisel, the Grinch, decided to put out a book called The Grinch, the Cat in the Hat, which I'm going to borrow that from the library myself. Looks like a damn good book, kind of to do it. And the Grinch means something is closed very tightly. So Ted Geisel really changed our vocabulary, probably in the world, I would bet. And if anybody from other parts of the world besides the United States hears this, I would absolutely love for you to comment and tell me what the Grinch means to you in other countries. Because the actual word Grinch to mean something is closed very tightly before Ted Geisel decided to write this book. He was a multimillionaire before the TV special. So that's lots and more facts. There was lots of other stories about the Grinch, and we know how much the Grinch Saved Christmas has changed society and everything. How many times has ever... I would love to hear too. How many times have you actually watched the Grinch on TV? I think I watched it every year. I liked it growing up. It was always really good. And of course the ending is really, really good. We love that poor dog, Max. So maybe I would also tell you guys a few of the mistakes that I kind of realized after I did this. This came out good. You'll see on this page, this is page 3, I think, that I realized after I penciled it, and I was too lazy to change it all, that I made the Grinch a little bit taller than the actual. In the book, he's even with his mirror, but I didn't change it because I thought he was looking down. I kind of liked it that way, a little bit bigger. And I think a lot of these pages come to life when I add the red. But it came out really good. I actually like most of these pages. It taught me a lot. I really do like cartoons. That's why I'm going to do cartoons for the next year. So, while taking care of my mother, I gave you all the interesting facts about... Oh, I know another really interesting fact that I learned from reading the book was that Ted Geisel's wife is the one that told Ted to change the Who's. Because at first, the Who's were more like bugs. And he drew them like bugs with little things. And you'll see later on there where I said, or you can see where Cindy Lou Who has all those little antennas. And Ted Geisel's wife said, you should make them look like bugs. They're supposed to be like people. So it's another good example. If you really do some research about everybody that's kind of famous, there's always a male famous. There's always a woman behind that kind of encouraged him and kind of led him to a way that made it more famous. So she told him to stop making them look like so much like little bugs. He liked little people, Ted Geisel really liked the Gulliver's Travels. So the Who's are kind of like the Lilliputians from the Gulliver's Travels. So that's how he made the Who's. And so he became famous for bugs. He drew for a bug spray ad. So his wife lived and changed the Who's. Behind every great man is a great woman. So also when people would ask Ted Geisel about his work and scholarly studies, he thought that his work was a waste of time because if they had financial problems, they dictated colors and go forth, which is what I've learned over my life too. So sometimes you look at something and then when you really look at the research, it's not what you think. So he had some other ideas, Ted Geisel, but when they actually printed the books, they changed things around to make it cheaper. Unfortunately, it's always about my almighty dollar, right? So that's how things were changed. So I would also encourage you to maybe try drawing this. I think I'm going to try to do January's earlier than typical Bujo videos to give you some time to do this. Because now I'm putting this out Thanksgiving Day weekend. You're not going to have time to do all this if you decide to do it. So, but I would highly encourage you to try drawing the Grinch. He's not really hard. He's not. And I really had a good time kind of drawing the outsides of him, just doing like little lines for his fur. It's really kind of fun. I did happen to see lots of times I've seen Jim Carrey talk about how miserable it was, the makeup that he had to do for when he played the Grinch. I've even seen him on some videos talk about how he actually had maybe a Navy SEAL or somebody talk to him and coach him on how to deal with sitting perfectly still and putting up with all of the makeup to make him the Grinch. It just seemed so miserable, and it sounded like he was probably really, really sorry that he ever decided to do it. I would highly guess that he probably kept on doing it because he had to for the money and the contract and everything. But I have seen him on some videos talk about how miserable that makeup was, and he needed some kind of meditation training, which is really, really good for anybody to do kind of meditation training. So I'm using a Tombow watercolor marker here. I don't really understand why everybody loves those Tombow watercolor markers. They're so frustrating. And then you see here, while I'm using the acrylic marker, I wanted to add more white, and I was trying to be a little bit lazy to kind of copy the original picture. But it's just, as we're all learning about everything when it comes to art and everything, that was really tough because whenever I put the acrylic marker, it just seemed to sink into the page. And even when I waited a day to make sure it was completely dry and added more white to it so it looked like the original from the original black and white book, it just always seemed to sink into the page. It was always really frustrating. So we're always learning, right? And that actually happened. I was using Archer and Olive. Everybody loves Archer and Olive, right? I was using those, and it seemed like the watercolor marker just kind of sunk into the page too much, and then when you added more white, the white always just kind of sunk in there. But I do like this picture came out good. Eventually came out good. So, since I've already taught you everything to do with Ted Geisel from Mr. Cohen, who was actually a dentist. This is from Charles D. Cohen. I already taught you everything that I thought was kind of interesting in that book, but I really think this is a good book for you to borrow from the library. I thought I would go over, maybe I'll go over a little bit for my mother. So, for taking care of her, art is and using your fingers. So, teaching health and fitness for the past 35 years, I was always so frustrated on why it was so tough for so many of my students to flatten out their hands doing push-ups, downward dogs, everything like that. And then reading all the brain books, it says that the fingers are the most amount of real estate in the brain. So that's what I did for my mother. I used to kind of force her, bribe her, trick her, everything to get her to write as much as possible. My mother was a musician. She was a good pianist. She was also a good singer. So I would get her to write out everything as much as I possibly could. And she didn't like doing it. She used to fight me. I even used to make her, since I moved her from Massachusetts out to California, I would have her write out all the receipts with the date and where, and that was just my way of trying to challenge her brain. I didn't really need the receipts. I'll add it up, but it was just a way to make her think and make her use her fingers. So that's why I try to teach all of my phys ed students now that the more they use their fingers, the better it is for their brain. So the more you use fingers, and then when I used to go out, I started going out to all these paint nights with my mother, which I mentioned in previous videos. She hated to stay home, and I can't say as I blame her, because I think watching TV, she couldn't really remember it. And of course, whenever a TV show or a movie would jump, which is normal, you guys are all used to something would jump. They're not going to show somebody leave their house, walk to the car, get in the car, drive to somewhere, that kind of stuff. So I think she was always frustrated because it would kind of jump, which is typical. And I would always tell her, I'm like, well, they can't show all that. So I would always try to, since she hated to stay home and she hated to read, she didn't want to read anymore. And she was a really avid reader, and she loved the news. I sometimes think that the news kind of hurt her, because the news kind of taught her stupid stuff a lot of times. She'd always come back and tell me something that she would learn from the news. I remember like 15 years ago, she would tell me that the news said, never let your credit card get out of your sight. And when she told me that, probably 15, 20 years ago, way before her dementia, I thought, how unrealistic is that? You give your credit card to your server, they go run it, and they bring it back. That is standard procedure. But the news article told her that you should never let it out of your sight. Well, that's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. And I really sometimes think that her being a news junkie really hurt her. But the news never taught her any healthy information, because my mother did not drink water. I noticed every summer I would go back and visit her, she would not drink water. She would have her coffee in the morning, and then she might have a small cup of juice in the afternoon, and that was not enough. And dehydration causes every imaginable problem you can think of. So that was part of how I helped my mother. I tricked her, bribed her, forced her to drink water. So when we used to go out to all the paint nights, I used to start using art to something for me to do. I got back into it, like I mentioned, and it was something I used to always, because looking at a picture is harder for your brain than even playing chess. So I would have her look at the instructor and what I was copying, and then I look at my picture, and I would have her tell me what I was missing. So she would have to be challenging her brain looking at it. I think another big thing that I thought was really helpful for her brain was my digital photo album. I took all the pictures of, my mother was a pain in the butt when it came to posing for pictures growing up. She wouldn't pose for any pictures, but she did meet my mother. This is a really good story. My mother actually got Elvis Presley's autograph in 1969. And what's kind of interesting is I saw a photo of her and my father, but you can't tell, it's kind of damaged because it's 1969. But learning Photoshop to write my book, I found out what year it was. It was 1969. So Elvis Presley was actually watching a concert for Jimmy Dean. Jimmy Dean was a country western singer, and he was actually in one of the resorts in Arizona that both my parents went to, because my parents were thinking about moving to Arizona. At least probably my mother was, because my mother was more domineering than my father. But they didn't like it. My mother came back. But I always remember her always telling me the story how she went up and got Elvis Presley's autograph. And my father, this is one of those things where you think, oh, why didn't I not ask both of my parents while they were still alive? They were still together then. They got divorced and separated when I was in elementary school, but they were together when I was 3 or 4. But I always wonder why they weren't together. So my father tells a story that he was in the front of this resort in Arizona, and he was looking at Elvis Presley's metallic purple Cadillac. And my mother saw Elvis Presley leave the audience for Jimmy Dean. So she followed him and went out to the front of the lobby and went to try to get his autograph, and part of his entourage tried to stop her. And my mother decided, I just want his autograph. So they let him go. My mother, don't you wish there was selfies back then? So my mother was a looker. My mother probably was beautiful. That was when she was 37. And my mother got his autograph, and she said, thank you. And he said, no, thank you. Isn't that a really great story? So anyways, I had his photo in the digital photo album, and I put all these photos. My mother also happened to see Rod Serling in Stockbridge, Massachusetts, and I had Rod Serling's photo, but my mother's story of Rod Serling was not as nice as Elvis Presley. She said that she happened to see Rod Serling, and I'm sure he was just busy and tired, and he probably, her memory of Rod Serling, and I have read many things that Rod Serling was a really, really nice guy, but I guess this one particular day when she saw Rod Serling, he looked at her and gave her a look like, don't bother me, and she didn't go over to him at all whatsoever. But I had his photograph in the digital photo album, and I also had Elvis Presley's, and I had everything else in there, but I also labeled and put what they were from her, a few pictures of her childhood and everything else. And she spent a lot of time always looking in the digital photo album. So I would highly recommend, if you're a caregiver, you should make sure that you create a digital photo album. It's really helpful. And then, so with my mother, when it comes to memory, I used to always try to also, at the end of the day, I used to ask her what we did. She never knew what we did. She used to kind of bluff. She was really good at bluffing. But I can't help but wonder about everybody. If you did not have, which I have this all in my book, if you did not have your calendar or your phone to look up what you did, or even with me, that's why later on you'll see my memory tracker. But how much would you remember without looking at your calendar? And there was one doctor, when I first moved my mother to California, I brought her to a doctor in San Jose Valley Medical Center, and he brought her in his office, and he asked her what the day was. And she did try to look behind his head, and went to look at the calendar on the wall, which we all do. And he stopped her and said, no, you can't look at the calendar. So all of us do that. I never went back to that doctor. I thought he was completely apathetic. He didn't care, which was actually the problem with many, many doctors. I really felt like everybody just felt like it was a foregone conclusion that my mother would totally forget everything. And she didn't. I achieved my goal. My goal was to stop her from forgetting me, and I did. So a little Reader's Digest version of my book I'll teach you guys. And remember, my book is called Mom Remembers Me. I tricked her off of caffeine, and that had a major positive snowball effect. She didn't need any more meds, no more blood pressure. Then she was able to sleep. And I tricked her, forced her, bribed her to drink water, and I kept her away from high fructose corn syrup. When she was drinking high fructose corn syrup, that's when she was a monster, calling me an effing whore. It is our food supply causing every imaginable problem. So stop eating the standard American diet. And it's not called SAD for nothing. The standard American diet is brutal. It doesn't really help you whatsoever. You have to go out of your way. And I used to always remind my mother, in the 70s, Phil Donahue had all of these TV shows about what was happening with our food supply. And my mother was mad when she kept watching these shows. But I think it was just so hard in the 70s. It wasn't as, I mean, it's still hard now. I mean, how many restaurants can you go to and not have the same, I call it the fat, sick, and nearly dead food places. I'm not going to name those restaurants, but I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. It's the same stuff at every darn restaurant. And there's a few of them out there that are really, really good, that have different stuff. And of course, I can see where people will just eat meat and starch because they overcook vegetables. You don't like them, You don't like them because they don't have any taste, because meat and starch, starch is a simple carbohydrate, so you have all of the uppers you get whenever you eat a simple carbohydrate. So going on here. Oh, this is the page I wanted to go over. Even in the book, he doesn't really look like the Grinch right there, does he? He looks a little goofy, doesn't he? So being a teacher and teaching health and fitness, it is kind of easy for me to keep on going with more and more information about health and fitness. If you also want a really interesting book, I read by Dr. Ken Berry, The Lies Your Doctor Told You. He mentions that there are no studies showing that high cholesterol is detrimental to your heart. My mother saw Dr. Oz on Oprah probably in the 90s talk about how Zocor, which is a statin, causes memory loss. And I do see frequently, I see doctors say, if you're taking a statin, you should take coenzyme Q10. Well, if you didn't take the statin, you wouldn't need the coenzyme Q10. And also in his book, he cites studies and books that all of the countries that there are no studies showing that the sun actually causes skin cancer. So all of these books and everything that you see about a sunscreen, there's no evidence that you need sunscreen. What happens is our food supply weakens your skin and thins your skin, and that's why you get skin cancer, because the countries that have higher prevalence of skin cancer are not the countries that have more sun and where people are showing their skin more often. So it's another good example of we believe and we trust what's out there has been studied and it hasn't. So back to the Grinch. I should stop going on about everything else unless you want to keep on learning. If you want some more information, by all means, make some comments. There's poor Cindy Lou Who complaining and saying to the Grinch, "Why are you taking our tree?" I do have the picture of the book right next to this, but I kind of cropped that out to save room so you can see me drawing. I do even now me watching me drawing while I'm doing this voiceover. It is kind of relaxing. It's kind of like watching people cook, right? Even watching the Food Journal, watching people cook is relaxing. On that second picture, page 2, when the Grinch was looking down over Whoville, I now wish I made him fatter. Right? He needed to be fatter. But he is really an easier cartoon character to draw, so I highly recommend you try drawing the Grinch. He just has a big smile. It's a simple shape of a face. Did you know, which I thought was amazing, the neurological tests, they make the elderly do these neurological tests. And I have been doing a bunch of research, and I have asked on a whole bunch of YouTube videos where the scientific data is for some of the neurological tests. So if you're a caregiver and you're listening to this, next time you go with your caregivee and they're giving them the 3-word recall test or the cube drawing test, ask them for the scientific studies showing the efficacy and how that really relates to our life. Because I was doing some research for my book and I can't find the actual studies. There are articles written by psychologists on the pros and the cons of them, but there's no studies that I could find. And every single and I probably have asked at least 25 YouTubers and the neurologists talking about it, where are the actual studies and how it relates to our life? And nobody has answered me whatsoever. So there is this 3-word recall test where they give somebody 3 words. They give the elderly 3 words and then say, ask them to remember. And they have a conversation and then see how many of the words they remember. So my mother always got 2 out of 3 words, and I think that's pretty average, which is actually another chapter in my book. I have a chapter on the trouble people caused. My mother made the same mistakes that everybody else made, but people would come to me and goes, "You gotta watch your mother." So back to the neurological test, I can't find any scientific data on them. I would guess somebody probably 40, 50 years ago figured out how can we do this, and they made up these tests. And then also when it comes to time, if you're out for the day without your watch or without your phone, do you know what time it is or what day it is? And do you know what day it is on your vacation? Because that's what they always ask. And that's always a joke about when you're on vacation, you don't know what day of the week it is. But they ask the elderly that. So what's also really, really interesting, Betty Edwards, which is a famous book, Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain, she says that people cannot draw a cube unless they've been taught. Well, guess what? People in the neurological tests, they make the elderly, for the neurological test, draw a cube with no training and no reference. And most artists all need a reference. So my mother did okay with the cube. She did fine. It did not look totally wacky. It wasn't really good. But, I mean, it was fine. You could tell it was a cube. So she did what was fine. And then 3-word recall test, I can't help but think, how many of you have a list, maybe a store grocery list, maybe only 3 items, and you go grocery shopping or any kind of shopping, and they only have 3 words, can you remember what they are without looking at your notes? I don't think most people can. Most people need some kind of notes, and they don't let them look at any kind of notes. And then there's also, I always think that my mother, so look at that, look at right there, that's the little, talking about the bugs. Remember I said about how Ted Geisel did bugs for some kind of bug spray, and then his wife pointed out, like, don't make them look like, don't make the Who's look like bugs, but he did still kind of did, because she's got those little things coming out of her head there. and that's throughout the entire book. Every single Who has like little antennas like a bug, but we know the Who's are still very, very cute. What else can I tell you about everything that I've learned about our healthcare industry, taking care of my mother, some of the problems? You know, I actually had to fight a nursing home in probate court to get my mother out. This nursing home, my mother went there for a minor neck injury, very minor. The ER doctor even told me it was so minor, but he was just doing it just to probably cover his butt. She went into this nursing home for rehab for that minor neck injury, and the day she went in there, they did this thing called invoking the healthcare proxy, and they use it as a way to hold her. So she knew where she was, and I wanted to take her, and she wanted to come with me, and they wouldn't let me take her. I had to go to probate court for 2 months, flying back and forth from California to Massachusetts, and I finally won. But if I had lost, that nursing home would have drugged my mother up with antipsychotics because she didn't want to be there. And of course, what happens is they gave her antipsychotics, and when she becomes psychotic, they blame my mother for her behavior, which is kind of true for a lot of healthcare. People kind of cause the behavior and then blame the person for that behavior. And then the police department in my hometown here, my city here, my little city in Northern California, actually put my mother in handcuffs. It was not her fault. Nothing to do with her fault. It was for their convenience. And then they insisted on getting a psych eval. And I said, I'm here. She wants to come with me, and she's not a danger to her. I didn't learn this until afterwards. I should have insisted. What you learn through life, right? If I'd do it over again, I would not let the police take her. But I can't help but think that the medical industry tells the police departments to insist on these psych evaluations just so they make more money. Because she goes to get the psych evaluation, and it was a complete waste of time and money. And they came back with this diagnosis, which was called adjustment disorder with mixed disturbances of emotions and conduct. Can you believe that? I will say it again, because when I first saw it, I was laughing hysterically, because it sounds like an ornery old coot who does not want to be told what to do, which was my mother. It's called adjustment disorder with mixed disturbances of emotions and conduct. It makes me laugh every single time I hear it. Adjustment disorder with mixed disturbances of emotions and conduct. So they gave that to her, and then what happened is the medical center gave her juice. They gave her Crystal Light, and Crystal Light has lots of studies for what's in Crystal Light. I'm blocking that out right now. Has side effects of causing depression. And after my mother left, that's when she wanted to hurt herself, after they gave her Crystal Light. Because I told them not to give her any sugar, so they gave her Crystal Light. Because we know that the fake sugar, alternative sugar, is actually worse than sugar. So just avoid your sugar. No more sugar. And I have also learned too, that I hate the expression moderation is the key. Well, people don't really have a rule for moderation. They just kind of say that and do whatever the heck they want, right? So I hate the expression moderation is the key, because the food industry and the sugar industry knows that if you have some kind of processed simple carbohydrates for breakfast, you're going to crave it all day long. So if you have pancakes for breakfast, a croissant, a bagel, cereal, I hope nobody eats cereal, you're going to crave it all day long. So I always tell my students, do not eliminate simple carbohydrates. The health information says reduce it, but I think you should eliminate it because there's no essential nutrients in processed simple carbohydrates. And if you start doing some kind of research, it's crazy. There was a guy named Fred Wiley way back, I'm guessing probably 30s, 40s, maybe 50s, when processed food was first started being introduced into our American food industry. And he started telling the American government, we have to start putting some kind of regulations on this. And the processed food manufacturers went to the American government and said, well, if you put these regulations on here, we can't make a profit. So the American government said, oh, okay then, that's okay. So the manufacturer said, we can't make a profit. So the American government said, okay, it's okay. You can do what you need to make sure you make a profit. So think about that when it comes to processed food. So that's why I always tell all of my students, eliminate processed simple carbohydrates. You don't need it. And it's not really hard to cook. It's not. So I make myself sweet potato hash browns a lot of times, or steel cut oatmeal, or I scramble tofu, or I make myself a blueberry kale smoothie for breakfast. That's what you need to eat for breakfast, and then you won't crave all the simple carbohydrates for breakfast for the rest of the day, because I defy you, if you have some kind of simple carbohydrate, even fruit, but fruits, I mean a little bit of fruit, so eating mangoes and dates and figs, those have fiber, those have some other nutrients in them that we need. But you don't need cereal. You absolutely don't need cereal. Okay, I gotta keep on going with more information for health, right? If you like some of this, I hope I'm teaching you some more stuff. I hate to be one of those YouTubers that says, can you like and subscribe? But I would really appreciate it if I'm teaching you anything and you're enjoying this whatsoever, to please like. At least like. If you don't want to subscribe, and I promise you, I will never ask you to set the alert button. I keep seeing that a lot of times, that when it says to hit the alert button, and I just feel like, first of all, when you subscribe, YouTube shows you any person's new videos, and you've also got the list, you can kind of look. But I always feel like we have enough alerts in our life right now that we don't need any more alerts. See, the Grinch came out looking pretty good there. You probably couldn't see, but I did pencil everything in there first. And I will probably be looking back at these. They came out good. I really like them. It was kind of easy to draw the fingers, right? Fingers are always kind of hard, but maybe that's I would bet, now, as an artist, and we're all artists, if you sign your name, you are an artist. I would bet sometimes when you see the history of somebody, you realize it's not what you think. I would bet that Ted Geisel decided to draw his fingers pointy like that just because it's easier. I remember seeing an actor on that TV show, Seuss, and he just puts the gel in his hair to pull it back. And I saw in something on one of the interviews, he just did that because he didn't want all the hairdressers in his face moving, he's touching his hair and fixing it all. So he's like, I'm just going to gel it back and get it out of his face so the hairdressers won't be bothering him during in-between takes. So, and I've seen that a lot of times with lots of stuff in life. We think there's some ingenious reason why it was done a certain way, and it was just done for convenience or just to make their life easier, right? But I would bet that Ted Geisel probably did that. When I was reading the book I mentioned, Ted Geisel did really have a fun time as an artist trying to create new characters. So he would take the body of a horse and the head of some other animal to come up with something kind of crazy, that's my goal. I want to be able to draw out of my head, which I couldn't do as a kid, but I wish I had kept on going with art. I do, when it comes to health and fitness, I'm glad I learned everything I did, but that's probably true for every profession, but it just feels like the fitness certifications are a way for them to make a lot of money, and they stick it to us and to all of us instructors. We spend so much money on more and more fitness certifications, and I even just had a job interview, and I have been teaching for 35 years, like I mentioned. I have probably 25 certifications. I kept getting bored with all kinds of group exercise, so I kept adding more and more to my repertoire. And I have AC, American College of Sports Medicine, which was the gold standard at one point. And now they keep changing that. Now it's NASM and some other ones. I just had a job telling me to get the certification, the newer one. They changed the name. American College of Sports Medicine changed the name. First it was health fitness instructor, then it was, I forgot all the names. It's changed at least 5 times, and they wanted me to get that. I can't help but think that company probably might be in cahoots with the certification agency to make people get the certification for a job that isn't even there. So the certification agency, and that would be good for studies. There's no studies showing that one certification makes anybody smarter than another one. And plus I have my master's degree from Springfield College, like I mentioned. And that's where Ted Geisel was from. On and on and on I go. I guess it's good that I'm comfortable. Oh, this is really, really interesting. I thought this was interesting when I was drawing this, because how many of you, I gave up meat a while ago in 2008, but I don't remember ever in my lifetime ever seeing bananas. You might not be able to tell that those are bananas, but it looks kind of like bananas in the original picture from the original book. So how many of you, please comment and let me know. Have you ever seen a roast? It didn't even call this turkey, it just called it a roast. How many of you ever seen bananas sticking out like for decoration for a roast? So here's my final flip through. Now I didn't have everything on here that I showed on camera for me drawing it, so especially this first page. So this is from the front cover of the book, and this is my birthday month. December is my birthday month, so that's probably why I decided to spend some time doing this whole video and filming myself drawing. So this is the first page. And you guys saw me drawing this, and then I added in the dates. And I decided just to pick the pages from the book, just a really condensed version of the story. We all know the story. Most people know the story, right? So I started off and I wrote in with just on the Micron 01 pens, the Grinch hated Christmas. And then he says, I must find some way to stop Christmas from coming.